A ray of sunshine broke through a small gap between the gray curtains and blinded Mary. She hadn't slept in a long time because her stepfather came home late from work, and, as usual, he lectured his mother for a long time. Mary never understood why her mother chose to marry this ugly and intrusive man, and she had 4 children with him, her younger sisters and brothers. Her mother was a kind and gentle woman, but very soft, and she could not resist her husband. All Mary knew about her father was that he was the first love of a very young Jessica, and left the day she found out Jessica was pregnant. Mary didn't want to get up because she didn't sleep and had to work all day. After graduating high school, her stepfather put her in the store as an assistant. Mary liked to study, but Harry Thomson did not want to pay for her further education. The girl dreamed of becoming a designer. She painted well that even school teachers often sent her work to competitions. On the shelf among the school notebooks and books, Mary had letters of thanks that she was very proud of. Her mother quietly went into her daughter's room and practically gestured that she needed to get up. Mary dressed, cleaned herself up, and caught a glimpse of her weariness and lack of sleep. Avoiding her stepfather, she burrowed into the kitchen, swallowed a sandwich, said goodbye to her mother, and left the apartment. The street was sunny and quite warm, despite September. The shop in which she worked was a 30-minute walk away. Mary took her time because she had a decent time. She strolled, thinking about everything, when suddenly she remembered that she had left her phone at home. She didn't want to come back, but she needed the phone too because, in between jobs, she managed to listen to a free intensive course for aspiring designers. Yet, deep down, Mary never gave up her dream of becoming a designer, so she decided to come back. The girl walked back so quickly that she ran into a young man who had just muttered in response to Mary's apology. Out of breath, she called the apartment, whose door could not open for a long time. Her stepfather was already asleep. Her mother was gathering the children for school. Mary grabbed the phone and ran to work. Mr. Alford, the clothing and shoe store owner, took a hard look at the late Mary, but said nothing. The girl slipped into the staff room and quickly changed her clothes. Her task was to keep the store clean and help the sellers. The store was on a busy street, so there were many visitors, and Mary ran between the clothing and shoe counters from morning to evening. So she came across one of her clients and thought she'd seen this man somewhere before. It was a young guy from the street who she ran into in a hurry and who seemed to recognize her too. He smiled and said, "Hey, can you stop knocking me down?" Mary was very embarrassed and blushed, but she didn't say anything. It must be noted that she was always embarrassed when young people paid attention to her, although she was beautiful. Blue eyes, white skin, and a proper nose gave her face a nice look. But she didn't even dare look at the young man and went to the other side of the hall. What a surprise it was when, after work, she saw that guy again at the door. Now he was embarrassed and barely heard him say, "I'm sorry, but can I walk you home?" Mary was embarrassed again and said nothing, heading towards the house. The young man followed her. "Don't think about it. I have no evil thoughts. I just liked you very much. I was afraid you would leave, so I waited for you. My name is Ryan. What's your name again?" Mary knew it was wrong to meet on the street, but she gave her name without knowing why. That was the beginning of their acquaintance. Ryan was now waiting for Mary the evening after work, and they went for a walk through the darkening streets. Mary learned that Ryan worked for a management company and that he was the only son in the family. The young people soon became mutually sympathetic. For Mary, their meetings were an outlet where she could take her mind off family matters. She was already dreaming of leaving her home, where there was little room for her because of her stepfather. They could talk about anything with Ryan, and they seemed to understand each other with half a word. And then the day came when Ryan met Mary and invited her to a cafe near the store. As soon as they sat down at the table, he made a small order and looked at Mary very significantly as soon as the waiter left. The girl was surprised, but did not say anything. "Dear Mary, you and I have known each other for 3 months. That's not enough to get to know each other. I love you." Mary blushed. Tears came out, and through them she whispered, "Me too." 2 months later, Mary and Ryan were married. The wedding was modest in the same cafe where the proposal was made. Only the closest and most few friends came. The young people first rented an apartment, but after a while, they took out a loan and bought a small, cozy apartment on a quiet street. Mary couldn't believe her happiness. At last, she is her mistress, without a grumpy and rude stepfather who counts every penny and never lets go of anything to reproach Mary and her mother. Mary had furnished her family's nest, although at first they lived very modestly, but the apartment was always clean, cozy, and smelled delicious. A year later, their son Mark was born, which Mary doted on. Amid her maternal feelings, Mary seems to have missed something in her relationship with her husband. Ryan was coming home more and more late than usual. He stayed with friends and went out on Sunday night with his buddies. At first, Mary did not pay much attention to this, explaining it to her husband's fatigue and workload. But one day, Ryan returned and confessed that he'd been fired from his job. From that moment on, a dark chapter in their life together began. Ryan refused to look for a new job, believing that he had been unfairly fired, and feeling sorry for himself for a long time. Mary was very supportive of him, but soon realized that the reason was that he didn't want to work. 2 months later, he just got used to living like this, and Mary was woefully short of money to support herself and her son. The funds provided by the state was not enough, and she stopped expecting support from her husband. 6 months had passed. Mary was relatively low, and then she decided to find a job. She left that job when her son was born, and finding a new one wasn't easy because she didn't have an education. She also had to leave the baby with someone. Ryan was afraid to keep the baby. Her mother was living with 4 children, and Ryan's parents, it turned out, were not keen on participating in the lives of their son and grandson. And yet, Mary got her mother to sit with Mark for a couple of hours while her stepdad was at work. And she was running around the organizations and offices asking that she be taken at least a cleaner. But they did not want to take this position. And, having completely despaired, she crossed the threshold only to open Hotel Monroe. She was met in the hall by a female administrator who told her that they only wanted cleanup girls who were responsible and decent. Mary agreed and was sent to the manager, who turned out to be a lovely young man. He listened attentively to Mary and, for some reason, felt a great deal of sympathy for her and decided that it would be okay if she were accepted as a maid. Mary seemed to him to be a friendly and tidy girl. Happy and satisfied, Mary was walking home. For some reason, she felt a new life was beginning for her. Ryan wasn't home. His mother said he'd gone away in a car, and she packed up and rushed home. Mary put her son to bed and went to sleep herself. In the middle of the night, she heard a noise and voices outside the door. Mary opened the door and saw her husband's friends, Tom and Brian. "Mary, don't worry, it's not that bad." This made Mary nervous and dizzy. Ryan was in a car accident. He hit a man on the street. Now he's at the police station. "Dead?" Mary whispered with her white lips. "What?" Tom didn't get it. "Hit him to death?" asked Mary, afraid to hear the answer. "No, but a man with a concussion, broken arm and leg." Mary breathed a sigh of relief, though she felt it was a temporary relief and all the difficulties lay ahead. She asked a neighbor to look after her son and went to the station. Ryan sat with his head down and was interrogated, but was released in the morning. Mary didn't ask him about the details of the accident. According to the coroner, Ryan was responsible for the accident, hit another car, and drove to the side of the road. The man was also walking in the wrong direction, but it didn't diminish Ryan's guilt. "What are we going to do?" Ryan asked Mary in confusion, as if she were the one who should know the answer. "Let us break through," answered his wife, and everything trembled with anxiety inside her. A series of interrogations, calls to the station, and meetings with a lawyer. The victim, the man, did not want to meet with Ryan and his lawyer and asked for possible and unthinkable amounts of physical and moral damage. Even if Mary and Ryan had sold everything, they wouldn't have that kind of money. Money was sorely lacking. Mary borrowed money from everyone who could help her, but it wasn't enough. They were waiting the court's final decision, which would determine how much to pay to the aggrieved man. It was Ryan's day to make amends, almost as good as their apartment. They had to make a decision. No one could help them. Mary was sitting on the couch. Her face was stone. Ryan dared not even look at his wife. After a profound silence, he said, "We need to sell the apartment. Part of the amount will be used to repay the loan, and most of the money will have to be paid to Manson, the victim's name." Mary was silent. She had nothing to say. She knew Ryan had no other choice. At that moment, she hated him for his cowardice, laziness, and infantility. What about Mark and me? Where are we going to live? Have you thought about that? But I have no other options. Otherwise, I will be put in prison. Do you want this? Of course, you would live here at your pleasure, and I sit behind the cage," he cried out. "You hit a man. You're to blame," said Mary. "Where am I going with my son? We have no savings, only debts." Mary went into the kitchen and cried. She seemed more miserable and miserable than ever. And Mark, her poor child, will wander in search of a home. But very soon Mary came to her senses. She was always strong, and she will not give up now. "Okay, sell the apartment. Only I have a condition. I am filing for divorce. I will not live with a man who has traded family for friends and poker. You refused to work when I was running around town begging for a job, and you were driving around the city with your buddies. I feel condemned and my son to poverty." Ryan stared at Mary with disbelief. A month later, they divorced in court. Ryan sold the apartment, paid a fine, and disappeared. Mary was left with her son in her arms on the street. Her mother felt sorry for her and called her home. But as soon as her stepfather saw Mary and Mark at home, he said, "You stay here tonight, and tomorrow you'll be gone. I don't need more mouths in this house." All night Mary did not sleep, and in the morning left Mark with her mother and went to work in Monroe. Without looking at anyone, she went to the manager's office and knocked on the door. "Yes, come in," said a familiar voice. "Mr. Castle, I have a challenging situation. I have no place to live with my son. If you let me and my child stay temporarily in the hotel, I can work overtime. Then I will solve the housing issue." Mr. Castle listened very carefully to Mary, and she cried. She had not called since that episode in the kitchen. She held on as best she could. "I'm sorry, it's my nerves." "Well, Mrs. Brooke, I'll make sure you have a room." Mary left with confidence. At least for a while, they will have a roof over their head, and there she will get out. The next day, Mary moved into a small room, which was a staff room. There was one big bed, a table, and a wardrobe. Nothing else could fit there, but Mary was pleased about that too. She was helped by sympathetic maids who looked after her son. A month had passed. One day she had a phone call. It was Ryan. He was drunk and demanded to see his son. He promised to sue for a time to see him. Mary's attempts to talk him out of it didn't help. "If you don't want to give me your son, then pay me the money," he shouted. Mary knew her son didn't want to see his father, so she said, "Okay, I'll only pay you if you disappear from our lives." "I promise," said the ex-husband. Mary hung up and wondered where she would get the money to pay off her hateful ex-husband. Mr. Castle, she thought. Mary realized it was risky to use the manager's kindness, but there was no way out. She decided to ask him for money and get away from Ryan forever. At that moment, someone knocked on their room door. "Come in," said Mary, in surprise, and even more surprised to see Mr. Castle at the door. What a coincidence, she thought. "I was passing by and thought I'd see how you were settling in," said the manager calmly. "Thank you. Well, thanks to you," said Mary, embarrassed. "You don't need anything, Mr. Brooke?" No, we have everything." "Why do you look worried?" "Yes, it is echoes of the past. The ex-husband asks for money, so he does not demand to see his son, and I do not want him to have his influence on him." It was in Mary's mind to ask about the money, but she didn't say anything, and the manager probably didn't think it was polite to ask her if she had any money. He glanced at the wall above the bed and saw a collage of superheroes on the wall. Mary was drawing this so that her son wouldn't be so bored. Mary caught his eye. "Mr. Castle, if it's too much, I'll wipe it all down. The paint's off easy." No, it's wonderful." After another minute, the manager said goodbye and left. The next day, after cleaning the rooms, Mary hurried down the hall to her room, when suddenly she was called and told that the manager was waiting for her in the office. Mary was alarmed, thinking it was about the painted wall. She entered the manager's office. Her fears were partially justified, but that's not what Mr. Castle was saying. "Mrs. Brooke, I appreciate your artistic ability and would like to suggest that you do the same with the wall in the children's playroom on the second floor of our hotel. Of course, the payment will be different than the one you received as a maid. Do you agree?" "Mr. Castle, but I have absolutely no artistic training, and I'm not sure." "Mrs. Brooke, do you agree or not?" "Yes," said Mary. For a whole week, Mary had been testing her art muse, and by the admission of many, everything worked out perfectly. The children's room became lively and colorful thanks to Mary's drawings. Her work was well paid for, and she paid off her husband, who called her almost every day. Having seen Mary's talent, the manager offered her a place as a decorator at the hotel. Mary agreed because it was her dream to become a designer. It was hard to start, but she could do it. She worked even at night. She was learning in parallel. Mark grew up. Mary took him to kindergarten. They left the hotel room when they were better off with the money. Mary rented an apartment near her mother so she could come to her daughter comfortably. Thus, day after day, difficult times and painful memories faded into the past. Now, every day was bright for Mary. Happiness with its warm rays touched her face. Good things were beginning in her life and continued. Soon, she went from Mrs. Brooke to Mrs. Castle, but that's a different story.